All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and start this.
To talk about in terms of Hurricane Florence, some major developments happening just within the last 12 hours in regards to the storm strength and storm track. We also have two other hurricanes in the Atlantic Basin, Hurricane Isaac and Hurricane Helene, on track to become the second major hurricane, Category 3 or higher, of the season. Here's the latest information on Hurricane Florence. Rapid intensification underway. This morning at 5 o'clock, it was a Category 1. Now, as of the noon advisory, it is a Category 4. That is in under 7 hours, that rapid intensification of 3 categories. Southeast coast landfall looking likely. Folks have been preparing, and for good reason.
This is my local TV station, guys.
Here within the next 72 hours, it's somewhere along
They're
the
going to upgrade it again here in a half hour.
Major hurricane. Now, the models are also indicating a scenario in which Florence stalls. If it is over land, that would equal historic freshwater flooding. Initially, it would be the storm surge causing all the flooding, and then 15
yes,
to
it did get
25
strong
inches
fast.
of rain certainly could be within the threshold of what Florence brings to the table as it moves on shore. Now, coastal erosion and flooding is already occurring long before the arrival of the storm. We're already seeing higher than normal tides, some coastal erosion, and of course, very rough surf. Red flags flying all the way up and down the southeast coastline. You'd think it was the peak of hurricane season or something like that. In fact, today is the climatological peak, and we have 5 systems out there to talk about, 3 of which have names. 2 are investigative areas. One that's going to be heading into the Gulf of Mexico that could very well become our next tropical depression. Of course, Hurricane Florence, Isaac, and Helene, and then another invest that's heading into the North Atlantic. That is nothing to worry about. Now, as of the current time, governors of the states of Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina have all declared states of emergency, locally as well. Currituck in North Carolina, as well as mandatory evacuations already being ordered down through the Outer Banks. Also, the U.S. Navy in the process of moving ships out from base, out from port, to the open oceans. They can actually weather it better than being in port there. So 3 states already allocating resources to deal with whatever wrath Florence will bring. Latest update, as I mentioned, 130-mile-per-hour winds. That puts it just at Category 4 status. 129 and greater is Category 4. In fact, here's the Saffir-Simpson scale that we use to judge the strength of storms. So Category 4 at 130. It has some strengthening to go before it could come close to becoming a Category 5 storm with 157-mile-per-hour winds or greater. The storm looks great, very healthy. You can see the outflow spirals. The storm is breathing well. Inflow at the surface, outflow up aloft, and this is just going to continue to intensify. It's starting to resemble that buzzsaw look that we've seen with so many storms, especially last year that got to major hurricane status. So overall, though, I want to show you here on satellite imagery and put the drawing tool on it. It's overall a pretty small hurricane, its size. The average size of a hurricane is 350 to 400 miles in diameter. We're looking at 270 miles here, but that likely won't last. As it starts to gain
yes, you're right, it is.
We'll likely see that storm expand a little bit and be a larger
maybe a possible
storm
Category 5, but they're not sure.
Along the southeast coast. A lot of assets being allocated to studying the storm, getting out ahead of it and forecasting it. And we have the Hurricane Hunter aircraft as well as several NOAA aircraft flying through the storm. That started this past weekend. Out there right now, the WP-3D Orion, Kermit, its counterpart, Miss Piggy, out in the Pacific. This is being allocated to Bermuda, so they are based there right now, flying missions into the storm on 12-hourly fixes. This is really kind of outfitted with some very cool technology to get a better picture of the storm. Dual radars that gets a better sense of the structure, and microwave radiometers that helps us sense the wind. And it also does something called deploying drop wind sondes. And these are little instruments that they drop through the storms, multiple of them, and they beam back information to the plane. That's how they can see the surface winds there. Also, we have the high-altitude jets, the Gulf Streams flying into the storm. One just recently came out of Florida and flew through it earlier this morning. These also deploy drop wind sondes, but this gets an overall structure of what the atmosphere is like around Florence. The atmosphere is moving into the upper level steering mechanisms that will eventually take it either close to the East Coast or onshore. I want to show you one of the missions here. Most recent Hurricane Hunters coming out of Bermuda this morning. That showed a central pressure dropping to 943 millibars. Don't pay attention to the wind speed there. That's the most current wind speed as they're heading out of the storm, but they did clock winds that prompted the upgrade, that special advisory at noon to the wind sustained at 130 miles per hour. In fact, I was reading the report and that they clocked 180 mile per hour winds, but that was 300 meters above the surface. So not quite surface level yet, but that just indicates the strengthening that's going on with this storm. Also, the high level jet moved through it earlier this morning, and I want to show you this because look at the cool pattern that it flies. It flies a circular rotation around the storm to get, again, the sense of the overall atmosphere surrounding Florence. And this deployed, in this particular mission, 23 separate drop zones that gave a great picture of what's happening in the outflow and the upper air steering mechanisms. Just some perspective here in terms of the distance. Still has a lot of ground to cover. We're closing in now under 1,000 miles from the North Carolina coastline, about over 1,000 miles from Cape Cod. Not that that matters, and likely not going north, and also from Miami over 1,000 miles. But keep that in mind, that entire distance is going to be over the open ocean waters of the Atlantic that are extremely warm. In the lower to middle 80s, you need 80 degrees or warmer, and we certainly have that. The overall atmosphere around it, too, you need a warm, moist atmosphere at heights, and that's exactly what we see here. This is the water vapor imagery, right? So it's showing us the dry air, that's the orange down to the south, but the area in which it's heading. Moist environment, dry air is not going to be a problem. Also, as I talked about, the warm sea surface temperatures on its projected path, mid-80s, a few areas, a few warmer pools, and maybe even warmer water than that. And
so
as we
right,
talked
Pamela.
about before, this isn't just along the ocean surface. The ocean heat content in this part of the ocean extends down to a depth. So when upwelling occurs, especially with a strong storm like this, the upwelling will not bring up cold water to the surface. It's just going to keep mixing warm water. So the energy source is somewhat unlimited with this system. Also, wind shear is going to be quite favorable for this system as well. All right, here's the latest track update. This was from 11 a.m., although it has the advisory in terms of the wind speed as of that special advisory at noon today. So it does show the cone of uncertainty starting to shrink just a little bit, but it still encompasses a very large area from Charleston, South Carolina, all the way up through Cape Hatteras in North Carolina along the Outer Banks. It is forecast to make landfall as a major Category 4, maybe high-end Category 4 storm with sustained winds of 145 miles per hour at that point in time. Keep in mind right now,
they will be doing the new report here in about 20 minutes.
So even stronger than it is now before it makes landfall. Somewhere, a lot of the models are starting to like the Wilmington,
They're waiting
North
on
Carolina
the
area. But keep
storm
in mind,
chaser
as we
planes.
look at this path, we're going to talk about the cone of uncertainty in just a second. The path here does not mean it's going to fall right along this line. This is the average or the center line right through that cone of uncertainty from the Hurricane Center. Every other line that you're seeing here is a different computer model. Notice here in a lot of the most recent runs, the majority of them fall on the east and northeast envelope of that cone of uncertainty. If, in fact, that does occur, we're going to talk about bigger issues out through much of Hampton Roads in northeastern North Carolina. Devastating conditions possible if it does verify one of these tracks through the Outer Banks. If it tracks a little bit farther to the south and west, less impact to the north and east. Vice versa. If it tracks a little bit farther to the southwest here, Georgia and South Carolina are going to see a lot more of an issue. So let's talk about that cone of uncertainty. You saw the plot on there. That indicates the center of the storm remaining in that cone of uncertainty. And even that only happens 2/3 of the time. You also have to take into account the storm size. Now, the cone does not indicate the size of the storm. You saw there that the diameter of Florence right now is just under 300 miles wide. So if it tracks down the center there, at the point in time that it gets out to this point, it's about 200 miles from east to west in this particular area. So the effects would extend far outside of that cone of uncertainty. So it's smart not to look at the forecast map and say, well, I'm outside of the cone of uncertainty, no need to worry. Not the case. Effects can expand way outside of that. Now, we've talked about comparing this storm to storms in the past. Well, let's talk about that climatology, okay? So the strongest storm to ever hit North Carolina was all the way back in 1954. I'm talking about North Carolina here because that's been the projected area where a landfall would be most likely if it were to occur. Way back in 1950s, that was the strongest, okay? It had sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. This is also the northernmost Category 4, Category 5 to make landfall ever on the continental United States. So that means that if Florence makes landfall in this general area, or maybe even north of there, that would shatter both of these records, not only for the state of North Carolina, but for the continental United States as well.
Well, I hope you're wrong,
mister.
mister.
Fact that the ocean temperatures in this part of the ocean are some of the warmest they've been in a long time, certainly well above average, and that's playing into the strength of Florence. I think it's about time we start talking about potential impacts as Florence gets closer to the coast. We are within 72 hours of a potential landfall. We need to talk about storm surge in low-lying areas along the coast, freshwater flooding thereafter with historic amounts of rain wherever it makes landfall, winds in excess of 140 miles per hour with gusts to 160, obviously causing a ton of power outages, widespread, and then coastal erosion as well. So pretty much we're going to check all these boxes here as that storm heads towards the coast. Let's talk about the general makeup of a hurricane and where you're going to find the strongest winds. Always going to be found in that northeast quadrant, the top right. Why? The storm momentum, the storm forward speed.
That's what's going to be hitting here in Virginia Beach if it stays on track.
This particular image here. At 10 miles per hour. You have sustained winds of 120. That means in here you'll find winds of 130 miles per hour, stronger than everywhere else. The front left will also have significant winds, especially as you get closer to the storm center. The back right will bring significant winds as well, really anywhere east of that eye. And then the back left will be the weakest of the storm, of the four quadrants, but still, you're dealing with a hurricane. It's still going to be dangerous. All right, let's talk more about the actual impacts as we go through the next couple of days here. This will change, but right now the highest risk looks to be central and eastern North Carolina, extending down into northern parts of South Carolina, and then eventually as it moves onshore and stalls out, we'd see a lot of issues in terms of flooding in central Virginia, moderate risk kind of bookends that, and then low risk outside of that. This will change with the change of the storm track. Now, this particular image here, we're going to talk about storm surge. This is for explanation purposes only. This is not where Florence is. This is not where Florence is heading. With storm surge, the winds on the eastern side of the storm as it heads towards the coast will pile up that water along the coastline, eventually throwing it up and over the coast, especially in low-lying areas. Say you're 3-4 feet above sea level and the storm surge is 5 to 10 feet, you're going to be inundated with at least 5 feet of ocean water as it gets blown onshore. It's not until the winds shift that that would recede, and at that point in time, we'd be talking about freshwater flooding as the storm rains itself out. Now let's talk about the wind threat. The probability of seeing tropical storm force winds at least are nearly 100% through a large chunk of the coastal areas of North Carolina. The probability of seeing hurricane force winds is increasing. That's about 50% chance right now. I'd say it's probably much higher than that with a Category 4 storm heading your way. And then the effect will be rainfall. This is one of the latest models from the EFS.
Sorry.
The latest model is indicated it stays a little bit farther to the east, so that's why these numbers have shifted a little bit. But overall, I'd say a good bet, a good swath would see 15 inches or more. Likely
That's my area.
More. Here's some of the latest runs of the GFS. This is the ensemble, so the same model run several times, each one with just a tweak in the initialization. And this kind of shows it all over the place, right? Anywhere from Wilmington, but it does favor a more northeasterly trend there. Also to take note, at the end of the forecast terms, the kind of little curly Q that goes on, that's indicating the stall-out potential here that would bring not covering much ground in 48 hours, not moving very far inland. Here's a look at the European ensemble spread. These are 51 members here. This favors a southwesterly trend somewhere right along the North Carolina-South Carolina border for a potential landfall. Let's not forget about the other two hurricanes out there. 3 concurrent hurricanes now. That occurred, coincidentally, at the same time, last year. We were talking about Irma, Jose, and Katia at this time. Now we have Helene and Isaac. Helene, by the way, is on its way to becoming the second major hurricane of the season. Here's a look at the projected track of Hurricane Isaac. Again, a Category 1 as it heads towards the Windward Islands. Still, obviously, going to cause some issues there. And hopefully just passing south of Puerto Rico, and they can get by just fine without that.
Yes, Pamela, you're right.
So we're strengthening Helene here to a major Category 3 hurricane within the next day or so, but then recurvature off to the north and dying out with colder ocean temperatures. Whew. Had a lot to talk about today. We're going to have much more to talk about as we go through the week. Each hour we get closer to a potential landfall. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out on social media or in the comments below. Meteorologist Tim Pandages, or also on Twitter at 13TimPandages.
Guys, I'll do the one when they pop up with it in about 20 minutes now. God bless. Be safe. Thank you for watching.